sort through there, and he says, oh, I'm going to go to the temple, and I'm going to worship, and I'm going to take a sacrifice. And so what I got to do is I got to go out here, and I got to take something to sacrifice at the temple. Because sacrifice is going to be the way that I get in touch with God. Sacrifice is going to be the way that I receive God's mercy and God's grace. Sacrifice is going to be what brings forgiveness and what brings atonement. And so he goes out to the field, and he begins to look, and he begins to try to find what it is that he wants, because he's got to take this sheep, this lamb, and he's got to take it to the temple, and he's got to give it to God. Okay? And the first thing in the minds of the hearers is the fact that sacrifice means that God wants it all. See, when I took a sacrifice to the temple, when the Hebrews took a sacrifice to the temple, they didn't take a part of an animal. Okay? They didn't say, well, it's time for this to do that whole heifer thing, and so what I think I'd do is I think I'll take out all the T-bones and all the, the roast and all the, and I'll just kind of take the brisket over there because I don't like to cook it, or I'll just take the whatever. Don't know who doesn't like brisket. I'm not complaining about it. I like beef in every form. But I'm just going to take the horns and the hoofs over there and do with. That's not the way it worked. See, God didn't call for a piece of something. He said, I want you to go out and I want you to get your sheep, and I want you to bring that whole sheep over here. And what I'm going to do is I want every piece of that sheep. I'm going to take its body. I'm going to take it from you physically. I'm going to take its breath. And I'm going to take its blood. I'm going to take its life. It's going to be mine. I get to do with that what I want to do with it. I get to determine what happens there, but when you bring a sacrifice, I get it all. And so the Hebrew that was going to take sacrifice in would go out to his field and he'd say, God's going to take it all, so I got to pick out a sheep for God. And the process is a hard one, because what God calls for is he calls for something that is important. See, you couldn't go out to the field to pick a sheep and go, which one doesn't walk right? Which one is a little scrawny? Which one doesn't have good bloodlines? Which one looks a little bit muddy or a little bit spotted or a little bit, not going to pass on good things? That's not what God had called for. See, the fellow who's going to take sacrifice goes out to his pasture, and he's got to pick the best from the flock. Okay? This has got to be something that's important to him. So what he's looking for is he's looking for a sheep that has no spots, that is not blemished, that is pure. Do you know what that means? That means that sheep's a moneymaker is what that means. See, that sheep has the genes that a guy who's raising a herd of sheep wants. That sheep represents financial security. It represents future interest. It represents something that you want to keep around, something that you want to pass on, something that is great in your flock. And God says, that's the one that I want. That's the one that you need to bring to me. That's the one that you need to bring to the temple, and I'm going to take it. When I take it, I take all of it. I don't leave any of it behind. But what you bring me has got to be important. Right? Why would a fellow do that? Why would somebody in that culture take this sheep, this important, spotless sheep, in to have it killed, in to have it taken from him, in to have it, because he understood that in sacrifice there was transformation. See, when he took the sacrifice in to present it to God, God said there are so many things that happen in sacrifice. I forgive your sin. I bring you into relationship. I cleanse you from everything in the past. I restore us to a place that is intimate. This is a place that you feel my love and understand my mercy and understand what grace is and understand what. And so there's a picture of sacrifice, in living sacrifice, that Paul touches, that those people that understand, that you and I need to grasp. Because as Paul says, I urge you therefore to present your bodies as a living sacrifice. What he says is, I urge you to understand what it is that God desires for you. See, God desires for us to be changed, for us to be transformed. He desires for us to look like Jesus. He desires for us to get it right by having Jesus at the center of our pond so that he can ripple out and touch every part of who we are. Right? But that requires looking at the things that are important in our lives, the things that are vital in our lives. What's important to you? What's important to you? You ask that question, and how many of you first thought family? That's what I think. Family. That's 4 of us. So I don't know what's going on here, right? How many of you said husband or wife? How many of you said lunch? That's what I'm thinking about right now. No. What's important to us? Job, family, friends, security. All of those things are important to us. Financial stability, good marriage, things that are important to us. Right? See, God says, I want you to sacrifice that to me. I want you to give me something important. I want you to risk something important for Jesus Christ. Because Jesus looks and says, I want everything that you got. Man, Jesus is selfish, isn't he? No, Jesus knows what's best for us. Jesus looks at us and says, I'm going to transform not just a piece of you, just a part of you. I'm going to transform what is important to you, and I'm going to transform every part of your life that you'll give to me, that you will sacrifice to me. Every part of your life that you will risk. That's part of our definition, right? See, risk is one of those funny words. We don't like the word risk. So, what I want to do is I want to talk about the life, because we talked about sacrifice. It means bringing to God something that's important, risking something that is important, right? So let's talk about the life. Go back to our definition. Living sacrifice is someone who is willing to risk everything that is important in their life for Jesus Christ. I look at that definition, I think about the term risk, and I go, I don't like the term risk. How many of you like risk? Nobody? Oh, man, how many of you like to skydive? See, you like risk. I'm just telling you now. It's the way that it works. Some of us like risk. Not a whole lot of us, though, like risk. See, risk is the unknowns. Risk is the... See, I think about risk, and I ask, what is that? What do I risk? How does that look? What is that about? I'm not sure about... See, I want answers when it comes to risk. Risk is the unknown, isn't it? Risk is something that might change who I am. Risk is something that's dangerous, right? See, I think about risk and it says, I don't know, a living sacrifice, someone who's willing to risk everything that is important. So let's take family in there. I want to risk my family for Jesus. What does that look like? What does that mean? Does that mean that Jesus calls for us to put our kids in physical danger, in physical harm? No. Jesus is not calling us to go skydiving without a parachute and push faith, and that's not what we're talking about. Okay? But see, I think our minds go to dangerous situations like that sometimes. I think sometimes we think, oh, if I'm going to risk everything, then I'm going to have to automatically be in some dangerous spot or something. And I'm not going to say that's not going to happen at times. Okay? I'm not going to say that sometimes I don't get a need to go someplace that somebody else may not go. Okay? But I don't believe that risk means the safety of our children or the safety of the people around us, or I think that in love, God calls us to responsibility there. But I do think we have some other things to risk. Okay? Because I think there's some other things that Paul addresses. He says, I urge you, brothers, therefore, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices. Right? In verse 2, he goes on to say, do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. Paul gets to this place and he says, I want to talk about the life that we live as folks. You and I live in a world that is fallen, right? Okay, I'm going to ask it again. You and I live in a world that is fallen, right? There's sin in the world, right? All right, good deal. Want to make sure that you're with me. Everybody asleep? No. We're going to make sure we're here. The world calls us to standard, doesn't it? The world calls us to believe things, doesn't it? I mean, we've got to understand from the very basic foundational points of our faith that the world is calling us to believe something. Is the world calling us to put our faith in Jesus Christ? For the most part, no. Okay? Well, but I heard so-and-so, and they were... I understand that. I understand we're going to see some things, right? But basically, we live in a world that is pretty much self-centered. That's sort of looking out for what's best for man. That's sort of looking out for what's best for us and calling us to believe some things that lead us in a place that God doesn't want us to go. And so we may as well just address that, okay? Now, in doing that, the world sort of sets up this series of standards and says, this is what somebody who's successful looks like. This is what somebody who fits in does. This is what marriage is supposed to be about and how we define it. Paul looks at us and says, I do not want you to be conformed to this world. I don't want you to think like they think. I don't want you to act like they act. I don't want you to hold the standards that the world has for you. And so what do I risk? I risk rejection. I risk sticking out. I risk not fitting in. I risk not looking like everybody else and maybe not being comfortable. I risk changing the way that my family functions.